Hello everyone, and welcome back to another True Crime Mysteries video. Thank you all for being here. Today we're discussing 4 more cases of wrongful convictions being overturned thanks to new evidence. Let's get into it. Number 4. Michael Morton. Michael and Christine Morton were a very average American family. By 1986, the couple had welcomed their first son, Eric, into the world. And in Michael's own words, quote, "We were average, a chunk of demographic study. The house, the yard, the kid, the car. We had everything but the picket fence. It was good." Michael had a steady job as a manager at a supermarket in Austin, Texas. And on August 12, 1986, Michael and his family celebrated his birthday at a local restaurant before returning home. Before he left on the morning of August 13th, Michael left Christine a note. In the note, Michael wrote how much he loved her, but was disappointed that they didn't have sex the night before. Michael left at 5:30 a.m., as Eric and Christine were still sleeping. That afternoon, as Michael drove down the street, he froze. His home had been cordoned off with crime scene tape, and there was a swarm of officers. Michael ran towards his home, but was stopped. Officers informed him that they had found Christine beaten to death. Michael's world crumbled around him. Thankfully, their son Eric, who was in the home, was uninjured. Officers determined that Christine had been beaten with a wooden object as she lay in her bed. A small patch of male fluid was also found on the bed, but DNA testing was unavailable at that time. The note heavily influenced their view of Michael, and they also learned that he'd arrived at work a half hour late that morning. Eric, who was just 3 years old at the time of the attack, was gently questioned by the Austin PD. He had said that a monster had attacked his mummy and that Daddy wasn't there. Neighbors of the Mortons had reported seeing a strange man in a green van close to Morton's home on the day of the murder. The man repeatedly parked his van on a nearby street before walking into a wooded area. Despite no physical evidence to tie Michael to the scene, he was arrested and charged with his wife's murder. Days into the investigation, a bloody bandana was found 90 meters from the Morton home. But this did little to change Michael's fate. According to the Innocence Project, the prosecution omitted vital evidence at trial, such as the fact that Christine's missing credit card had been used in San Antonio at a jewelry store, as well as a check that Christine hadn't cashed yet had been cashed after her murder and after Michael had been arrested. The prosecution didn't call the chief investigator, Don Woods, to testify during Michael's trial. The prosecution claimed that Michael had killed his wife in the early morning hours because she refused to have sex with him. The Travis County medical examiner also estimated that Christine had been murdered at around 1:15 a.m., although he said that this was not a, quote, not a scientific statement. Months after Michael was arrested and he was found guilty of murdering his wife Christine and sentenced to life in prison. Michael filed several appeals, none of which were successful. Michael and his legal team also rallied to have the bandana tested for DNA, but this was denied by the state. Thankfully, in 2011, this ruling was overturned. The blood and hair found on the bandana was tested, revealing Christine's DNA, which was to be expected because it was her bandana. But also found was the DNA of another man, Mark Allen Norwood. Due to the new findings, Michael Morton was exonerated after 25 years and released from prison. 2 years later, in 2013, Mark Norwood was tried and found guilty of Christine's murder and sentenced to life in prison. In 2016, Mark Norwood was found guilty of the murder of Deborah Baker, who was found murdered in her home in Austin, Texas in 1988.
Morton and Norwood, 2 names tied together by a brutal murder. Yet, here they both were, happy to meet each other.
I'm glad I met you both.
Take care of yourself.
So many things have happened because of that August morning in 1986, when these names were forever linked. Michael Morton went to prison, an innocent man, for 25 years for his wife Christine's murder. Dorothy Norwood truly believes her son Mark is now living the same nightmare.
My son? Well, first off, he's innocent, and I guess I should know it because these last years we've lived together.
The jury took just 3 hours. The key piece of evidence, Morton blood, Norwood DNA, once again, together on the same blue bandana. It was enough to end any ideas of innocence in Michael's mind.
You can talk about contamination, you can talk about all the what ifs, we don't know exactly what happened, but that one thing was really hard for me to get around.
After this day, the two names, the two families will go on their own ways. But before they did, Norwood and Morton locked each other close. It was like they have been all along and always will be.
You feel it, a common spirit between some people, and some people you don't. We do, I think.
Time has made it possible so that we can go on without too much animosity or anger. It's a big exhalation.
Michael has since found peace with himself, as well as those involved with his incarceration. He was awarded a lump sum payment based on the number of years he was wrongly incarcerated for an annual annuity of $80,000 per year. He was able to reconnect with his son, who had cut ties with him as a teen. Eric had been adopted by Christine's sister and for many years believed his father to have killed his mother.
Thank God this wasn't a capital case, that I only had life, because it gave the saints here at the Innocence Project time to do this. I'd like to thank them and Judge Hall. I thank you also for giving it the attention that it deserves and it needs. And I thank you for respecting the fact that there are a lot of things that I can't say right now, because I still have this hanging over my head.
Deborah Baker's daughter holds Ken Anderson, the original prosecutor in the case, personally responsible for her mother's death. She believes that he cut corners and allowed a predator to walk the streets for decades after Christine Morton's murder, which in turn allowed Norwood the opportunity to murder her mother. Ken Anderson was later disbarred, and his license to practice law was revoked when it was discovered he willfully withheld evidence to the defense in Michael's case. Number 3. George Allen. In the 1980s, 26-year-old George Allen Jr. resided in University City, Missouri, surrounded by his friends and family. George had been diagnosed as schizophrenic years earlier and had been hospitalized several times, but was undergoing treatment. On March 14, 1982, George had a chance encounter with a police officer that would change his life forever. Whilst walking, George was approached by an officer who had mistaken him for another man, Kirk Eaton. Eaton was a prime suspect in the murder of 31-year-old Mary Bell. On February 4, 1982, Mary was found in her St. Louis apartment. She'd been sexually assaulted and stabbed multiple times. The scene was brutal, with the knife being located in a blood-soaked towel near the front door. George, who officers believed to be Eaton, was taken to a nearby police station for further questioning. According to reports, partway into the interview, officers realized their mistake, but decided to carry on interrogating George anyway. George, who had a history of severe mental illness, was under the influence of alcohol and had no grasp of what was happening to him. The intense pressure of the situation broke him down, and he ended up confessing to not only murdering Mary Bell, but several other sexual assaults. George's confession was recorded, and as reported by the Innocence Project, quote, "The detective asked highly leading questions and prompted George to give him answers to fit the crime, often asking George change his answer to do so. The information that George gave directly contradicted to the crime scene, but the St. Louis police arrested him and charged him with murder anyways." At trial, the prosecution entered forensic evidence in the form of semen fluid that was found on Mary's body. At the time, Mary also had a boyfriend that lived with her. According to reports, blood tests were used because DNA was not available. These blood tests showed that the sample contained A and H antigens, which allegedly did not conclusively rule George out as a suspect. This was the only piece of evidence that the prosecution put forward. Witnesses recalled that on February 2, 1982, University City as well as St. Louis had encountered a snowstorm, and most residents found themselves trapped in feet of snow. It would have taken a significant effort and time for George to have cleared his way out of the 20-foot snow to Mary's apartment. No other forensic evidence, such as fibers or fingerprints, were found linking George to the scene. George suffered through 2 trials, as the first trial was declared a mistrial after a deadlocked jury. At his second trial, George Allen Jr. was found guilty and sentenced to 95 years in prison. George and his team appealed the decision, but his conviction was upheld at every turn. In the 90s, the Innocent Project began working with George and his family, but it wasn't until 2012 that the truth finally came out. Thanks to the diligent work of the Innocence Project, new evidence came to light.
It's been 30 years of unspeakable heartache for Mr. Allen and for his family. He has a lot of support, not only from his family, but from the community, as you can see here today. And they just want this nightmare to finally be over.
This evidence included tests that excluded George and Mary's boyfriend as suspects in the case. Moreover, the DNA found on Mary's clothing was found to be her boyfriend's, not George's. The blood test evidence had been purposely hidden, turning the trial to fight the prosecution's agenda. Finally, in November 2012, George Allen Jr. was exonerated and was released from prison. George spent nearly 30 years behind bars for a crime he did not commit due to tunnel vision by law enforcement.
I have spent 30 years in prison as an innocent man, and those have been difficult years for me and my family. But I never gave up hope. I knew that someday the truth would come out, and now that day is here. I look forward to living with my family again and getting on with my life. I thank my mother and family for standing by me all these years, and I thank my attorneys at the Innocent Project and Brian K. for helping me. Thank God this nightmare is finally ending.
In 2013, the case against George was officially dismissed, but George would only experience 2 years of freedom before he passed away in 2014. 4 years later, George's family received $14 million from a federal civil rights lawsuit that had been filed in 2014. Number 2. William Barnhouse. On April 21, 1992, officers in Muncie, Indiana, received a call from a terrified woman. She called to report that she'd been sexually assaulted and that her attacker had ridden away on a bicycle. Officers quickly arrived at the scene, a vacant lot, and began taking the woman's statement. The victim told investigators that her attacker had forced her up against a wall before assaulting her 3 times. Muncie officers took the woman into their car and reassured her that she was now safe. She told law enforcement that she would never forget the face of the man who did this to her, which gave them an idea. They believed that the woman's attacker would be someone in the local area, and according to the Innocence Project, they canvassed the neighborhood until they came across a few men that fit the profile. One of these men was 35-year-old William Barnhouse, who was out minding his own business. In a flash, officers told William to line up with the other men. Here they were told they were possible suspects in a sexual assault that had occurred hours earlier. Confused and terrified, William was frozen in fear as police officers shone flashlights into their eyes. The victim immediately pointed to William, crying to the police that he'd been the one to attack her. Based on her identification, William Barnhouse was arrested and taken into police custody. While William was being interviewed, sample swabs were taken from the victim and the clothes she wore at the time of the attack. In 1992, DNA was slowly making its way onto the scene, but it was very new and misunderstood technology. These sample swabs were analyzed, and according to the Innocence Project, the analyst who oversaw this, quote, could not eliminate William as a source of the evidence based on blood type analysis. Aside from the woman's identification in the lineup, there was no other evidence to link William to the crime. The DNA evidence did not conclusively prove that William's DNA had been found in the woman's jeans, only that he could not be ruled out. The evidence was incredibly shaky, but Williams was taken to trial on December 1992. At trial, the prosecution also called forward another forensic expert who presented a single hair as evidence. The analysis stated that only William's hair standard matched the singular microscopic hair found on the victim's clothing. No DNA testing was performed on the hair at the time, and the prosecution was confident with their evidence presentation. The jury was swayed by the arguments put forth by the prosecution, especially the hair. Despite no sound evidence linking William to the crime, he was found guilty and sentenced to 80 years in prison. Williams had suffered from severe mental health issues his whole life, and many believe the police took advantage of this. Despite being faced with an 80-year-long prison sentence, William didn't lose hope. Many years into his sentence, he contacted the Innocence Project, which began looking into his case with a team of experts and lawyers. In 2016, the state of Indiana allowed external DNA testing to be performed on the semen samples obtained from the victim's clothing. This analysis also confirmed that the DNA found in the kit and the clothing belonged to the same man. That wasn't William. Moreover, the Associated Press reported that Williams had been born with a chromosomal condition that left him unable to produce sperm. After decades of being held behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, 62-year-old William Barnhouse was released on March 8, 2017. In 2019, Barnhouse filed a federal lawsuit against Muncie County, which included several of its police officers and employees of the Indiana State Police Crime Lab. He settled the lawsuit for $860,000 in 2021. Number 1. Clemente Aguirre. At around 9 a.m. on June 17, 2004, the lives of the Williams and Barres families changed forever when the bodies of 47-year-old Cheryl Williams and her mother, 68-year-old Carol Barres, were found at their homes in Altamonte Springs, Florida. A relative had stopped by their house to collect some items, but when he walked inside, he discovered that there was blood everywhere. Reports indicate that Cheryl had suffered the most extensive injuries out of the two, and she'd been stabbed over 129 times. Carol, who was particularly vulnerable following a stroke, had been left paralyzed, was still in her wheelchair, and had been stabbed twice. The relative, Mark Van Sant, along with the boyfriend of Cheryl's daughter, Samantha Williams, ran to the nearest phone after making the horrific discovery. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found a bloodied knife halfway between Cheryl's home and their next-door neighbors. Suspicion was immediately cast onto the next-door neighbor, 24-year-old Clemente Aguirre, who lived with two other people. Investigators quickly discovered that Clemente worked at a restaurant, and that the bloody knife found between his home and the victims resembled one that had disappeared from the restaurant in the days before the attack. When officers entered Clemente's home, they found a bag filled with bloody clothes. Samantha, Cheryl's daughter and Carol's granddaughter, told investigators she had a strong feeling that Clemente was somehow involved in the murders. When Clemente was brought in for questioning, he dropped a bombshell. He confessed to investigators that he'd been to Cheryl and Carol's home before 9 a.m. that morning. He went on to say that he'd gone into their house to ask for some beers when he came across Cheryl and Carol's body in the home. He claimed that he ran over to them to see if they were still alive and if CPR was possible, but it was too late. When asked why he didn't call the authorities, Clemente sheepishly answered that he was frightened of the authorities as he was an undocumented immigrant from Honduras and was afraid of being deported. The bloody knife, the bloody clothing, and the confession that he'd been in the home that morning were all investigators needed, and in June, Clemente was charged with 2 counts of murder. He explained that he had found the knife when he'd went over, and instinctually grabbed it in case the attacker was still in the home. He later threw it outside onto the grass. One of Clemente's fingerprints was found on the knife. However, it was later revealed that this fingerprint had not been suitable for comparison and had been incorrectly identified. He was arrested and charged with double murder. In 2006, Clemente stood before the jury that would decide his fate. At the time, the evidence against him was compelling, and analysts had not yet realized their mistake with the fingerprint. After weeks of arguments and evidence presented, the jury was ready to make their verdict. Guilty. Clemente Aguirre was sentenced to death.
I didn't do it. I don't kill nobody.
A year after his conviction, analysts realized that the fingerprint found in the knife had not been suitable for comparison, and Clemente continued to file his appeals. In 2011, Clemente worked with the Innocence Project to obtain DNA testing, which had never previously been requested by Clemente's legal counsel during his initial trial. These tests found that Clemente's DNA was not the source found at the scene, and in fact, the possible suspect was much closer to home. According to the Innocence Project, Samantha Williams' DNA was found in 8 locations that the defense contended were consistent with her being the attacker. Several motions and appeals have been filed, and the legal process to have Clemente exonerated is complicated and messy. The state has ordered that Clemente be retried, with one judge remarking that this new evidence would not have seen Clemente acquitted. In 2018, Clemente was exonerated and released from death row, but may still face deportation if he's not allowed to seek asylum. The Innocence Project is currently working to have Clemente declared a wrongfully convicted person, and this ruling will allow Clemente to seek compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. It appears that Clemente's case is ongoing, and the Innocence Project has petitioned to help with Clemente's case. Samantha Williams later confessed to murdering her mother and grandmother. She had a history of severe mental illness and had been known to outburst violently when angry, and she admitted she had fought with her mother the night before she murdered her. She later said that, quote, "The demons made me do it." Clemente's legal team filed a civil lawsuit seeking damages for his wrongful conviction, and he was ultimately awarded $720,000.
Hello, my name is Clemente Aguirre. I'm from Honduras. I was exonerated 48 hours ago. Thanks to God and the Innocent Project, who bring me a group of attorneys who fought for my freedom. 14 years, 4 months, and 19 days I've been incarcerated. 10 years, 3 months of them in death row. But today is a brighter day, a new day, and I got good hopes for the future.
Well, that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. As always, if you want to support the channel, the easiest way is to hit the like button. You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. Other ways to support the channel by joining my Patreon or channel membership. I also have merch, and you will find all the links in the description box, plus a few extras. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter for more. But with that being said, thank you so much for being here and supporting what I do. It is very appreciated. That's it for me. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.